Hi there. I don't know about you, but personally, I love to have a keychain or two on my keys. It just helps to locate them in my purse or my coat pocket so much easier. I don't, however, love paying for them, especially when I can make it myself. Even better this year, I'm going to make up a bunch in a variety of patterns and colors as personalized gifts for my friends and family. My 13-year-old daughter is even getting in on this simple craft action this year and making them for her friends as well too. This is such a fun, personal gift and super affordable considering it's a great way to use up all of those extra scraps. So let's get started. To begin, you'll need basic sewing supplies like a sewing machine or a needle and thread. You'll need other things like coordinating thread, scissors, pins, scrap fabric, and ribbons. You'll need your interfacing, template, your key ring, and other embellishments that you may need. To get started, I am going to first determine the shape and placement of my pattern. I'm going to then layer it and trace around it. I like to be conscientious of the placement according to the pattern on my fabric. I'm just using an ink pen to trace over it, but you can use disappearing ink or chalk or pencil, whatever you want. But you want to be able to be sure that when you take it to the sewing machine, you can actually see the lines because you're going to sew directly over those lines. So here I'm just simply tracing around my letter. I used an A. I've made them in a lot of different letters just to personalize them for the specific person I am giving it to. So now you can see I've traced around that, and next I'm going to cut out a scrap of interfacing. You could use scrap fabric that won't show through your fabric that you chose for your top fabric, or you could even use an old piece of terry cloth or a towel or something like that. Just something to give it a little bit of stability. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and layer your bottom fabric, which you could choose a coordinating color to your main fabric for the top if you want. I'm just using 2 layers of the same fabric, and then I'm going to put my interfacing between it. Next, I'm going to go ahead and pin around my stitch line or around the lines that I drew so that I can avoid the fabric shifting. We don't want that. Just a few pins will do. And then finally, you want to take a piece of ribbon. I used rickrack here and just make a small loop. This is what you're going to later attach your key ring to. And you'll just want to sandwich that in between your layers of fabric and interfacing in this case, and then pin it in place. And then when you stitch over it, you'll see that you stitch directly over that ribbon and encase it within those layers. There I have my pin, so I'm going to take it directly to my sewing machine, and I'm going to use a straight stitch for this one, but you could use a zigzag stitch if you'd like as well. I'll show you that in the next project that we do. So here I'm just using a coordinating thread, and I'm just stitching around my lines, just directly over the lines. You want to take your time and ease around the curves and pivot at the corners of your work so that you have a nice neat stitch. When I pivot, I always leave my needle in the down position, and it just makes it easier. When you get to your ribbon, you want to be sure that you take the time to backstitch over it a couple of times just to make sure that you have it nice and secure. So you'll see that's what I'm doing here. That's where I've reached my ribbon, and now I'm going to lower my needle and stitch it back and forth a couple of times just to make sure that it's in there nice and secure. Now I'm going to trim my threads and finish it off. So next, using a pair of scissors, you can see that I'm going to go ahead and just cut just on the outside of those stitching lines. You want to make sure you don't cut through your stitches as that would ruin the project. Um, But yes, I'm just going to take my pinking shears in this case, and I'm going to trim off the excess fabric. I like to use about 1/4 of an inch allowance around the threads, and this will, for me, I like this. It'll fray slightly over time, and I like that look. But if you don't want to do that, you can use some sort of sealer to, seal your edges, like a fray stop or fray check, I think. Or you could, as you'll see in my next project, use a zigzag stitch, and that'll kind of finish off the edges nicely. So also here, you want to make sure that you're careful not to cut directly through your ribbon. Remember that it is sandwiched in there. So I just pull the fabrics apart and trim each layer. That's done. Finally, for this project in particular, since it is the letter A, I didn't want to do a cutout in the center, so I'm just going to use the button to give the illusion of that center space. And I'm just going to use my machine to secure the button, but you could hand stitch it as well. There you go. Trim your threads, and it is complete and ready for a key ring. Next, I'm going to do another project, and this one I'm just going to use some fun fabric and a heart shape. And just the same as with the first project, I'm just going to trace around it using my template as a guide. And then I will take it to the machine after doing, sandwiching it with the interfacing and the ribbon, pinning it in place. And you can see here that I was careful to take into account the design of my fabric and use that to play up the features that I would like to showcase in my heart. So I'm just taking this purple ribbon, I'm going to trim the excess, and then again, I'm just going to sandwich it. I like to offset it from the center a bit so that the heart hangs nicely. And then I'm going to pin it in place. And then once again, I'm going to go ahead and take it to the machine. However, on this project, I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. I set the length pretty tight so that it does it really close. And I'm just going to take it to the machine, sew it around the lines, directly over the lines still. And when I get to that ribbon, I'm going to do the same thing and just make sure that I backstitch over it several times to secure it nicely. I like to go over the stitching 2 times. So when you get done with that first line, go ahead and go over it a second time. This to give you a nice finished edge. Once you've trimmed your threads, again, you just take a scissor. I'm going to use straight scissors this time instead of pinking shears, and I'm going to cut pretty close to the stitching lines without trimming any of those threads. And you can see how nice and tight those stitches are, so it almost gives you an embroidered look, maybe from like if you have a embroidery machine, which I do. And that's another nice tip is that if you have an embroidery machine, you can really make several of these very quickly and they'll look nice and professional. And I know that your friends and family will really appreciate them. As you can see here, I'm trying to be very careful not to cut my ribbon nor my threads. So I'm taking my time to trim very close to those edges without going too far. And I'm going to get my applique scissors, and since they're smaller size, and I can do a little bit more detailed cutting here and just trim that excess fabric off. And now I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and attach a key ring. Just goes right through the loop. And it is easier to attach this once you're completed your sewing. You could actually do it before if you'd like, but then you have to worry about that keyring getting in the way of your needle when you're sewing, and it threads on nice and easy. So as you can see, in a relatively short amount of time, I was able to put quite a few of these together. I really think that they look really great attached to a gift as a little surprise embellishment. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Happy sewing!